Ave Maria.
The angel Gabriel was sent from God to a town of Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin whose name was Mary. I'm Father Mark Wagner, and on this day when all of us are sheltering in place, I'm sheltering in a very special place. It's a special place for me because I actually spent my first 2 years of priesthood here at the Cathedral of the Annunciation here in Stockton. So I'm spending some time here today alone in our cathedral because today is March 25th, the feast day of the Annunciation of the angel to the Blessed Virgin Mary. I got permission to come here and to take a few pictures of the stained glass windows and to tell the story of our beloved cathedral. Perhaps I should begin by wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, because after all, today is the 25th, exactly 9 months before the Blessed Virgin Mary gave birth to her son Jesus. So today is the day when she conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit. Perhaps thinking about these beautiful mysteries will help cheer us up in this difficult time. Just the other day, I talked to a family on the telephone, and they said that they were trying to cheer themselves up by watching old Christmas movies. I've always been very much inspired and cheered up by this very beautiful church. It's actually constructed by the same architect who built one other beautiful church in the city of Stockton, Morris Chapel on the University of Pacific campus. The history of our cathedral is quite interesting. When it was built in 1942, the original thought was that the old St. Mary's downtown would be torn down because of its dilapidated condition. However, a few years later it was decided that the old St. Mary's would be remodeled, and so both churches would continue in existence. And so St. Mary's Church downtown was often referred to as Old St. Mary's. And to this day, St. Mary's downtown is always called Old St. Mary's. Not so much because it's old, which it is, it's the oldest Catholic church in the county, but it's called Old St. Mary's because there was going to be a new St. Mary's to replace it. This is why the oldest photos of the new church being constructed say the new St. Mary's Church, because it was thought to be a replacement for the old one downtown. When Old St. Mary's was remodeled, the pastor there wanted the old bell back, which had already been moved to the new church. However, Monsignor McGough, the tenacious pastor at the new church, said that the bell had already been installed in their new bell tower, and that it would be impossible to remove the bell without tearing a hole in the side of the tower. And he wrote to the pastor of Old St. Mary's and to the archbishop, "If you supply the dynamite, I will blow up the bell tower and return the bell." Once the decision was made not to tear down the old St. Mary's Church and to restore it instead, it became necessary to find a new name for this new church building. It had been built to be the new St. Mary's, and all of it was to honor Our Lady. But looking around the church, I think perhaps they looked at this most beautiful of the stained glass windows, which is the image of the Annunciation, and they came up with a new name. It would be called the Church of the Annunciation, and later became the Cathedral of the Annunciation. In the church, there are several things that remind us that this building is dedicated to the honor of womanhood and of the fact that God became a man born of a woman. Behind me is the altar of Our Lady, and here in the east transept, there's a stained glass window that has featured in it the women of the Old Testament. On the other side, there are the women of the New Testament, but all of them are women saints. Now, on the left here, you can see, for example, Eve. She's the one wearing a snake and biting an apple. But nowhere in the church will you find Adam. Here now are a few images of women which are found in the cathedral, many of which show the great love and honor which the Lord showed toward women.
Oh
On the wall of the west side of the church, you see a painting which is a replica of a fresco painted by Blessed Friar Angelico of the Annunciation of the Angel to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Monsignor McGough closely supervised every aspect of the church. When it came to putting in the stained glass windows, this window behind me was the first one to be put in. As you can see, the shades of color are slightly different than the others. When he looked at it, he saw that there were a lot of yellows and greens, and he said that he would prefer more red and blue. And so the next window and the windows throughout the rest of the church have warmer, deeper shades of red and blue. On the east side of the church, the stained glass windows have the different saints. Here we have Saint Thomas Aquinas and Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Dominic, Saint Catherine of Siena, the saints from the history of the church. And on the west side, it's the apostles, Peter and Paul, and then the other apostles, not all 12, but just 8 of them. At the back of the church, above the choir loft, there is another stained glass window with a cross and the 4 great prophets of the Old Testament, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Daniel. They predicted a Messiah who would be both human and divine. And so the message is clear. God became a man, and he came into the world through a woman. Going back to the middle of the church again, to the transept, or the arms of this cross-shaped church, we see the cathedral has side doors, and above the side doors are interesting stained glass windows, all of which depict the fact that Jesus is God. And so if you ever wondered where in the Bible it says that Jesus is God, you just have to come here and look at the windows above the 2 side entrances of the cathedral. For example, from the Gospel of John, we have Jesus saying, "I and the Father are one." And also from the Gospel of John, "He who sees me sees the Father also." And Peter's proclamation, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus proves his power over the wind and the sea. Only God could control the wind and the sea in the thought of the Old Testament. Above the side door on the east side of the church, we have more examples of this. For example, here we have Jesus responding to John the Baptist, affirming that he is the Christ who would come to cure the blind and raise the dead. And the prophecy from the book of Daniel, chapter 7, that a Son of Man would come gloriously on the clouds of heaven. And here we have the story of the possessed man who knew and affirmed that Jesus was the Holy One of God. Here in our cathedral, you find something interesting, I think, that you find in many Catholic churches, and that is little roofs. We honor our saints, for example, by building little roofs over their sanctuaries, over their shrines. For example, here we have St. Anthony of Padua and St. Teresa, the Child Jesus, and behind me, St. Joseph. Other examples of this are the beautiful roof above the crucifix on the main altar, and the little roof that's attached to the ceiling directly above what was once the main altar of the church. There was actually an old rule in the ancient times that an extra roof had to be built over the altar just in case there was a leaky ceiling. This became the origin of the baldacchino, which is found in many of the basilicas, for example, in Rome. Another very interesting feature of our cathedral is the ceiling. The roof consists of these beautiful beams which make the ceiling look like the wooden beams of a Scandinavian hunting lodge or a mountain cabin. To all appearances, these beautiful beams seem to be made from gigantic wooden trusses. However, they're actually made from poured cement with rebar inside. The cement was poured into wooden molds to create the texture of wood and then painted to look like wood. And so obviously in case of fire, the danger will not be so great as it was for Notre Dame in Paris this past year. So obviously a lot of steel rebar was necessary for the building of these walls, which wouldn't have been a problem except that this was 1942, in the middle of World War II, when all of the citizens of this country were gathering metal for the war effort. Monsignor McGough did not want to scandalize the people, and so the rebar for the building project was actually buried in a grass area next to the church, and then during the night they would bring up just enough rebar that they needed for the construction on that day.
Dominus tecum, benedictatum in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae.